The diner smelled like burnt toast and fresh coffee, the kind of scent that makes you feel grounded even if everything else in your life is shifting. I was sitting in a corner booth in Tampa, Florida, stirring sugar into my cup, enjoying the rare feeling of being completely, blissfully unbothered. I had moved here only a few weeks ago, new job, new apartment, new routine. For once, life felt like something I chose, not something chosen for me. So when two police officers walked toward my booth with solemn expressions, my first thought was that they were looking for someone else. I didn't realize they were walking toward my name. "Sir, are you Luis Navarro?" one officer asked. His voice was steady, but his eyes held something cautious, like he expected me to panic or bolt. I nodded slowly, confused. Instead of explaining, he reached into a folder and slid a piece of paper across the table toward me. At first, I thought it was a citation or some kind of routine notice. Then I saw the photo. My photo. Smiling awkwardly in a picture taken months before I left home. My breath froze as the rest of the page came into focus. Because it wasn't a notice. It was a missing person flyer. My picture was centered at the top, printed in bold ink. Missing. Luis Antonio Navarro, age 27. My height, my weight, my hometown, all listed like facts on a resume I never wrote. But the line that stabbed me in the gut was near the bottom. Possible self-harm risk. I felt the blood drain from my face. I wasn't missing. I wasn't unstable. I wasn't in danger. I was drinking coffee at a diner, planning what groceries to buy afterward. I looked up at the officers, stunned, waiting for them to say this was a mistake. But instead, they looked at me like I was a ghost, sitting in my own body. One officer cleared his throat. "Your family is worried sick," he said gently. "They think you're in danger." Worried. The word clanged in my ears like a dropped pan. My family wasn't worried, they were controlling. Manipulative. Overbearing in ways that looked like love from the outside but felt like suffocation from the inside. I'd moved out for a reason. I'd left without a dramatic announcement because drama was the oxygen they breathed. And the fact that they'd filed a missing person report? That wasn't concern. It was punishment. The officer continued, unaware of the storm inside me. "We were told you vanished 6 days ago. No phone calls. No messages. No sign of contact." I almost laughed, bitter, disbelieving. I didn't vanish. I changed my phone number because my brother kept calling and texting nonstop, demanding updates and making decisions. For me, like I was still a child. I didn't disappear. I stepped away. But in my family's mind, stepping away and going missing were the same thing. Because if they didn't have control, they assumed disaster. I explained to the officers that I had moved voluntarily, that I was fine, that nothing had happened except me trying to live my own life. They exchanged a look, part relief, part confusion. "Your brother filed the report," one of them added carefully. "He said you'd been acting unpredictably and might hurt yourself." I felt something inside me twist. My brother, the one who always said he knew what was best. The one who never let me make a single decision without his input. Of course it was him. Of course he escalated things. I handed the flyer back with shaking hands. "I'm not missing," I said. "I just moved out." The officers nodded, already realizing he'd been pulled into a family power struggle they never wanted to mediate. They apologized for the disruption and said they'd close the case immediately. But as they walked away, I stared at the flyer still lying on the table, my face printed under a word that didn't belong to me. Missing. And in that moment, something became painfully clear. My brother wasn't trying to find me. He was trying to drag me back. My name is Luis Navarro. I'm 26, born in the dry heat of El Paso, Texas. A place where the sun feels like it's trying to iron you flat, and family gatherings feel like small-scale festivals. Growing up, everyone knew everyone else's business before breakfast. Secrets didn't survive an hour, and privacy was treated like contraband. The older I got, the more suffocated I felt, like living inside a house with no doors. That's why Tampa felt like oxygen the moment I arrived. Quiet streets, new faces, no one yelling through the walls. But I didn't realize how far my family was willing to reach to drag me back into their orbit. I moved to Tampa for a new job and a clean start, a chance to figure out who I was without constant commentary from 15 relatives. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. A small apartment, a steady paycheck, and the freedom to decide what I ate for dinner without someone criticizing my choices. It felt almost rebellious, living quietly. Some days I'd walk along the waterfront just to remind myself that distance was real, that I wasn't trapped anymore. But what I didn't know was that freedom, to my family, looked like abandonment. I come from a big, loud family, where love is measured by proximity and obedience, where independence is treated like betrayal, and boundaries are seen as personal attacks. If you don't show up for a cousin's birthday, you're disrespectful. If you don't call daily, you're ungrateful. If you move out without permission, you're dead wrong. I grew up surrounded by people who confused control with care, who thought that closeness meant ownership, and I learned early that escaping them wasn't as simple as packing a bag. My older brother, Gabriel, was the golden child, the perfect one, the family's self-appointed guardian, the hero's son. He was the one who always had opinions about my life, who I should date, where I should work, how I should spend my money. He didn't just think. He knew best. He believed it like gospel. And he expected everyone else to bow to his version of right. If he said jump, most people in our family were already in the air. But I was the one who finally stopped jumping. When I left home quietly, no dramatic farewell, no family meeting, no begging for approval, it felt like the first real decision I'd ever made for myself. I packed my things in silence, drove to Florida with the windows down, and breathed air that wasn't filtered through someone else's expectations. For the first time in years, I felt peace settling over me. Not excitement, not triumph, just relief. But Gabriel saw my silence as rebellion, a rebellion he wasn't willing to tolerate. I thought distance would give everyone time to adjust. I thought they'd realize I wasn't abandoning them, I was saving myself. I thought they'd understand eventually. But instead of letting me grow, they tightened their grip. Calls turned into accusations. Messages turned into guilt trips. My absence became a scandal, a family crisis, something to fix. And when I changed my number to regain some breathing room, that's when Gabriel decided I was no longer independent. He decided I was missing. To him, there was no difference. If he wasn't controlling my life, then something had gone wrong. And the moment those Tampa officers handed me my own missing person flyer, I realized something chilling. Gabriel wasn't trying to bring me home, he was trying to erase the fact that I left. When I first told my family I was moving for work, I expected shock, maybe a few tears, maybe even reluctant support. But what I got instead felt like I'd stood up in the living room and announced my own funeral. They stared at me like I was confessing a. My mom's hands started shaking. My dad's jaw tightened. Gabriel's eyes narrowed like he was already calculating how to stop me. It wasn't the reaction of people who were sad, I'd seen that before. This was something else. This was the look of people who believed I'd broken an unspoken law. Dad was the first to speak. Real family sticks together, he said, voice low and heavy, like a verdict. He didn't ask what job I got. Didn't ask why I wanted to move. Didn't ask what it meant for my future. His only concern was the distance, the loss of control. To him, leaving El Paso wasn't an opportunity, it was betrayal. Something about the way he looked at me that day stuck with me. It wasn't disappointment. It was possession slipping through his fingers. And possession doesn't let go without a fight. Mom reacted differently emotionally, dramatically. She cried for days, not soft tears, but loud, suffocating sobs that filled every corner of the house. She'd sit at the table clutching rosary beads, saying things like, "How could you do this to us? And we raised you better." She acted like I was disappearing forever, like Tampa was the end of the world instead of a 2-hour flight away. But beneath the tears, there was something sharper. A guilt so carefully wielded it felt like a blade wrapped in a hug. Gabriel, though he didn't hide behind sadness, he came straight at me with full force. "You're ungrateful," he spat. "Everything we've done for you. And this is how you repay us?" He acted like I owed him my life, as if existing outside his shadow was some sort of moral offense. He kept pacing the room, repeating the same line over and over. "You're not ready to be on your own." Not because he believed it, but because he needed me to believe it. Because if I believed it, I'd stay. It wasn't love. It was control dressed up as concern. Every guilt trip, every lecture, every dramatic warning boiled down to one thing. I wasn't allowed to decide for myself. Independence wasn't seen as growth. It was seen as rebellion. And rebellion, in their eyes, was betrayal. They didn't want me safe or supported. They wanted me contained, predictable, within reach. But the more they pushed, the more I felt myself slipping out of the cage they'd built. So I packed my things quietly and left before dawn. Not to be dramatic, not to punish them, just to avoid the shouting, the crying, the accusations. I loaded my car in silence, heart pounding, headlights cutting through the dark Texas morning. I didn't block anyone. I didn't vanish. I didn't burn bridges. I just needed space. needed air, needed room to grow without being pruned back into the version of myself they preferred. But leaving in peace doesn't mean the people you leave behind will honor that peace. I thought they'd reach out eventually with calmer heads. I thought they'd understand once the dust settled. But instead, the silence turned into suspicion. Suspicion turned into panic. And panic turned into something far more manipulative. Because in their world, space isn't a request, it's an insult. And Gabriel, the self-appointed guardian, decided he would fix the problem of my absence by declaring me missing. Back in the diner, the officers sat across from me like mediators in a crisis I didn't know I was in. One of them leaned forward, elbows on the table, his expression soft but concerned. "Why didn't you tell your family you're okay?" he asked. His tone carried no accusation, just confusion. I almost laughed at the absurdity. "I did," I said, sliding my phone across the table. I opened my messages, showing them the texts I sent before leaving, the updates I gave during the move, the calm explanations I'd offered before Gabriel began flooding my inbox. The officer scrolled slowly, and the deeper he read, the deeper his frown became. I showed them the call logs next my outgoing calls, my unanswered attempts to reassure my family I was safe. The timestamps lined up, messages sent, messages ignored. I even showed them my last conversation with my mom, where she didn't ask if I was okay, she asked when I was coming home. I wasn't missing. I wasn't silent. They had simply decided that because I wasn't physically present, I must be lost. The officers exchanged glances, something unreadable passing between them. It was the look of people starting to realize they'd been manipulated. Then one officer cleared his throat and said something that made the world tilt sideways. "Your brother specifically told us you're mentally unstable and might harm yourself." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words didn't make sense, not because they were unfamiliar, but because they were so devastatingly deliberate. Gabriel hadn't just exaggerated. He hadn't misunderstood. He had lied, flat out fabricated a crisis. And he had used the one subject no one questions: mental health. My stomach twisted with nausea. The officer continued carefully, as if walking across glass. "He told us you'd been acting erratically, disappearing, withdrawing from the family, showing signs of depression." He spoke like reading from a psychological evaluation, one my brother had invented. I felt heat rise in my chest, not from shame, but from betrayal so sharp it felt physical. Gabriel didn't worry about my well-being, he worried about losing control. And control, to him, was worth lying to law enforcement. The officers weren't trying to judge me. They were trying to understand how they'd been pulled into a family drama disguised as an emergency. "We take those claims seriously," one said gently. "That's why we responded so quickly." I nodded slowly, forcing myself to breathe, because it wasn't their fault. They reacted to the information they were given, the wrong information. "I'm not suicidal," I said quietly. "I never have been." The officer nodded, relieved. But the relief didn't reach me because Gabriel had crossed a line you can't uncross. Mental health isn't a card you play. It isn't leverage for control. It isn't a tool for manipulation. But Gabriel used it like a rope, something to drag me back home, something to tie around my decisions until they looked like his. It made me sick to think about how easily he twisted concern into a weapon, how confidently he must have spoken to the officers, how rehearsed his lies sounded, and worst of all, how believable he knew they would be. The officers filed their report, apologized again, and assured me the case would be closed. But as they stood up to leave, one of them hesitated. "Just so you know," he said softly, "your brother is insisting on flying out here. He told dispatch he won't stop until he brings you home." My blood ran cold. Because Gabriel wasn't just lying to law enforcement. He was coming to finish what the flyer started. When I pulled up to my apartment complex later that afternoon, all I wanted was quiet, maybe a shower, maybe a nap, maybe 10 minutes without feeling like my life was being puppeteered from Texas. But the moment I stepped onto my floor, my heart dropped. My apartment door was wide open, not cracked, not ajar. Wide open, swinging slightly from the draft of the hallway. I froze, pulse pounding. For a brief, panicked second, I wondered if someone had broken in. But then I heard voices, familiar voices, and my stomach knotted itself into a fist. Because chaos had found me again. Before I even stepped inside. Inside my small living room were two neighbors and a police officer. They turned toward me the second I appeared, relief washing over their faces. "Louise," one of the neighbors said, "thank God you're back." The officer stepped forward next, professional but visibly tired, like this wasn't the first emotionally charged call he'd responded to that day. "We're here for a welfare check," he explained. "Your brother requested it. He said you weren't answering calls, and he feared you might have harmed yourself." The words hit like a hammer, heavy, forceful, and painfully familiar. Gabriel had done it again. Another emergency. Another false alarm. Another manufactured crisis wrapped in the language of concern. The officer continued. "He provided us with your address and insisted we come immediately." That part made my chest tighten. My brother didn't even know my new address until I gave it to my mother, which meant she had given it to him. Despite knowing exactly why I moved, I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "I didn't answer because I didn't want to talk," I said. "That's all." But in Gabriel's world, no was never a complete sentence. My neighbors stepped closer, both looking rattled. The older woman who lived across the hall said, "Your brother came here earlier, knocking on every door on this floor." I blinked, stunned. "He was here?" She nodded firmly. "Yes. Going door to door asking if you seemed depressed, if you'd been acting strange, if anyone heard noises." My skin crawled at the thought. Gabriel wasn't just calling the police. He was canvassing my building like a man hunting for proof of a crisis he invented. Another neighbor chimed in. "He told us you disappeared, that you weren't in your right mind. We were worried something awful happened." Their concern wasn't the problem, it was the fact that Gabriel weaponized it, manipulated good people into thinking I was a danger to myself. He hadn't just pulled law enforcement into his control spiral, he'd pulled strangers into it, too. And the worst part? He did it with the confidence of someone who believed the world would always take his side. Because for most of my life, they did. The officer asked me a few routine questions. Was I safe? Was I mentally okay? Did I have any medical needs? And I answered honestly. I wasn't in crisis. I wasn't unstable. I wasn't missing. I was exhausted, tired of being hunted under the guise of protection. When the officer finally concluded the welfare check, he gave me a sympathetic look. "Your brother sounded very distressed," he said gently. "But next time, try calling him. Like, take hints in the minute." I almost laughed, as if one call could fix a lifetime of overreach. After they left, I stood alone in my living room, staring at the open door, the moved objects, the footprints on my carpet. My home, my little sanctuary, felt invaded, not by criminals, but by concern so forceful it became a violation. Gabriel wasn't trying to help me. He was trying to convince the entire world that I was broken without him. And then, as I went to close the door, I noticed something wedged underneath it, a single piece of paper, folded in half. It was another missing person flyer. But this one had my new address written on the back in Gabriel's handwriting. I barely had time to process the welfare check nightmare before my phone lit up with Gabriel's name. The screen glowed in the dimness of my apartment, the ringtone piercing through the silence like a warning siren. Part of me wanted to let it ring out, ignore it, block it, cut the cord entirely. But another part knew he wouldn't stop. People like Gabriel don't accept silence. They push until you break. So I answered. His voice on the other end wasn't panicked or relieved, it was cold. "You think you can just leave?" he demanded. "You think you're better than us?" It wasn't a question. It was an accusation he'd been waiting to throw at me. I tried to steady my breathing. "Gabriel, I'm safe," I said gently. "I just needed space." That word space set him off like gasoline on a fuse. "Space?" he snapped. "From what, Luis? From your family? From responsibility? From reality?" He spoke like I'd abandoned my entire bloodline, like moving for a job was a crime against humanity. He didn't want reassurance. He wanted submission. And with every word, it became clearer. He wasn't calling to check on me. He was calling to reestablish dominance. When I didn't back down, his tone shifted from angry to something darker, quiet, controlled, weaponized. "If you don't come home by Sunday," he said slowly, "I'll tell the police you're unstable. They'll bring you in for evaluation." My grip tightened around the phone. For a big second, I wondered if I misheard him. "Are you threatening me?" I whispered. Gabriel didn't hesitate. "No," he said. "I'm protecting you from yourself." But that wasn't protection. That was coercion disguised as compassion. He was threatening to use the mental health system, the same one, designed to keep people safe, as a leash around my freedom. He knew exactly what he was doing. A simple allegation, the same one he'd already used to justify the missing person report, could trigger another welfare check, or worse. He was telling me, in no uncertain terms, that if I didn't return to his control, he'd make sure the law dragged me back. And the chilling part? He sounded confident he could do it. Before I could respond, I heard shuffling on the other end of the call. My mother's voice broke through high-pitched, trembling, theatrical. "Please, baby, come home," she cried. "We need you." Her words were soaked in desperation, but not the kind that comes from genuine fear. It was the desperation of someone trying to reel in a fish snagged on the line, pulling harder the moment it swims too far. I closed my eyes and let the sentence sit there, heavy and unfair. Because the truth was, they didn't need me. They needed control. "Mom," I said softly, "I am safe. I just want to live my own life." But she kept crying, heaving dramatic sobs that felt rehearsed. "We can't sleep. We can't eat. How could you put us through this?" The guilt dripped from every syllable, thick and suffocating. It wasn't concern, it was manipulation woven into maternal instinct. She wasn't asking if I was okay. She was demanding I return to the role they understood. The role where my choices weren't mine. Gabriel cut back in, voice sharp, as if he was done entertaining. The emotional theatrics. "This is your last warning, Luis. Come home." Then the line went dead. No goodbye. No pause. Just silence. I lowered the phone slowly, feeling the weight of the threat settle into my bones. He wasn't bluffing. He wasn't panicking. He was planning his next move using fear, guilt, and authority to drag me back to the place I fought so hard to leave. And as I stood alone in my quiet Tampa apartment, one thought chilled me to the core. If my own family could twist the system this easily, what were they willing to do next? The next morning, I walked into work trying to quiet the storm in my head. I forced myself to focus on the day: emails, deadlines, the ordinary rhythm that had finally begun to feel normal. But that normalcy shattered the moment a detective walked through the glass doors of my office, his badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. My manager's face went pale. Coworkers peeked over cubicles. My heart dropped into my stomach. He walked straight to me and said, "Luis Navarro?" And suddenly the room felt too small, too bright, too exposed. We stepped into a private conference room, but it didn't feel private at all, not with my coworkers watching through the glass, whispering, speculating. The detective closed the door gently and said, "We received a report this morning." He paused, studying me the way a surgeon studies an X-ray before cutting. "A report claiming you might be a danger to coworkers." For a moment, I thought I misunderstood. Then the words fully registered, and my blood turned cold. Gabriel hadn't just crossed a line, he'd obliterated it. My employer panicked. HR rushed in, eyes wide, hands clasped nervously. They had to take the report seriously, they legally had to. They suspended me from my tasks while the detective asked questions. Suddenly, I was the one being investigated. Me, the guy who showed up early, stayed late, and kept to himself. The idea that I could be a threat felt absurd, until I realized that to Gabriel, credibility didn't matter, results did. The detective asked if I'd ever threatened anyone, if I'd shown signs of distress, if I'd recently argued with coworkers. Each question felt like a needle puncturing the thin membrane of the life I'd built. I answered honestly, calmly, clearly, but panic churned under my skin because it didn't matter how truthful I was. Someone had weaponized my identity again, and this time they aimed the bullet at my livelihood. And a false allegation can travel faster than the truth ever will. Finally, I asked the one question that mattered. Who filed the report? The detective hesitated. His eyes flicked to the floor, then back to me. "We normally don't disclose that information," he said carefully. But I didn't look away. I didn't blink. I needed to hear it. After a tense pause, he exhaled. It came from a close family member. I didn't need the name. My soul already knew. Gabriel. My brother. The protector. The hero's son. He wasn't just trying to drag me home anymore. He was trying to destroy my life until I had no choice but to return. He was tightening the noose with each escalating lie, hoping I'd suffocate and surrender, and the cruelest part? He probably believed he was justified, that controlling my life was an act of love, that sabotaging my job was necessary to save me. But his version of saving always looked like suffocation. I felt humiliated. My coworkers avoided eye contact. HR whispered in the hallway. The detective's questions made me feel like a stranger inside my own life, like I was being erased and rewritten by someone miles away who thought my autonomy was dangerous. I was exposed, vulnerable, cornered in a room full of people who didn't know the truth behind the chaos. And that was the moment something inside me snapped, not into anger, but into clarity. I realized I could no longer ignore or hope this would blow over. Gabriel wasn't trying to help me. He was building a case to take my freedom away. And if I didn't act soon, The next knock on my door might not be a welfare check. It might be an involuntary hold. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I booked the flight to El Paso with trembling hands, my chest tight the entire way to the airport. I wasn't going home, I was walking into the lion's den. The plane hummed beneath me as clouds passed by, and every mile we traveled made my pulse quicken. But, beneath the fear, something stronger burned. Resolve. If Gabriel wanted a confrontation so badly, he was going to get one. When the wheels hit the runway, I knew there was no turning back. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't running from anything. I drove straight to my parents' house, the one I grew up in, the one that felt smaller every year Gabriel's shadow grew. When I pulled into the driveway, his truck was parked exactly where it always was, the spot he claimed as his, symbolic as ever. I walked up the front steps, each one feeling like a memory I'd rather forget. Before I could knock, the door opened. Gabriel stood there, arms crossed, expression perfectly rehearsed. Fake concern coated his face like cheap paint. "There you are," he said softly. I was so worried. But worry doesn't smirk. I stepped past him without returning the greeting. My parents were in the living room, stiff and silent, as if waiting for a staged performance to begin. I placed a folder on the coffee table, thick, heavy, filled with days of documentation I should have never needed to collect. "What's this?" Gabriel asked, still playing innocent. I opened the folder so all of them could see. Inside were the receipts of his cruelty. I laid out the pieces one by one like evidence in a courtroom. The false workplace report, the missing person flyer, the welfare check documentation, printed statements from my neighbors. Each sheet landed on the table. With a quiet slap, the sound sharp in the tense room. "You did all of this," I said, voice steady despite the fire burning in my chest. "You lied. You escalated. You endangered my job. You humiliated me. You don't get to control me. You don't get to write my life for me." Gabriel's jaw tightened, not with shame, but with offense. He didn't apologize. He didn't even pretend to reflect. He exploded. "Ungrateful," he shouted, pointing at me like a dictator scolding a traitor. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you treat us? You abandon the family and expect us to do? Just accept it?" The volume rose with every word, anger pulsing through each syllable. But his rage sounded hollow now. Predictable. Scripted. The same lines he'd used my whole life, only now I finally heard the emptiness behind them. Mom jumped in next, crying dramatically, clutching tissues. Like props. "Louise, why are you attacking your brother?" He was worried. We were all worried. Her tears weren't confusion, they were pressure. She wasn't mourning a crisis. She was mourning the loss of control. Dad chimed in after her, the loyal echo. "Your brother had every right to act. You scared us." I stared at them, 3 people talking at me. Not to me. 3 people reacting to the narrative Gabriel created, not the truth I lived. Same script. Same manipulation. Same family choreography I'd grown up suffocating under. But this time, something had shifted. I wasn't a scared kid anymore. I wasn't someone begging for approval. I wasn't someone willing to shrink so others could feel bigger. As they kept shouting and crying and demanding, I looked at each of them and felt something I never expected. Distance. A distance that didn't hurt. A distance that finally felt like freedom. And when Gabriel leaned in and said, "You will come home," I finally realized. He still had no idea I hadn't come home at all. I had come to end it. The day after the confrontation, I walked into the police station with a clarity that felt unfamiliar, sharp, cold, necessary. Filing a complaint against my own brother wasn't something I ever imagined doing. I wasn't trying to get him arrested. I didn't want him dragged away in handcuffs. What I wanted was protection. A record. Something that proved I wasn't the unstable one in this situation. He was the manipulator. When the M&E officer typed up my statement and placed it in a file, it felt like placing a brick between me and the life I'd escaped. A wall Gabriel couldn't climb without consequences. The officer asked if I wanted to press charges for false reporting. I shook my head. "Not yet," I said. "I just need this documented." He nodded knowingly, as if he'd seen this kind of family dynamic 100 times before. "Paper trails save people," he said. "You're doing the right thing." His reassurance should have comforted me, but instead it opened an ache in my chest. I hated that I had to reach the point of involving law enforcement just to protect myself from my own blood. But self-preservation isn't betrayal, it's survival. After that, I visited my workplace. HR listened as I explained everything: the false claims, the welfare checks, the fabricated danger. I provided them a copy of my police complaint and asked that any future reports involving me be cross-checked before action was taken. They agreed immediately, their faces softening as the truth unfolded. "We're here to support you," my manager said gently. "Just keep us informed." For once, I wasn't being treated like a problem, I was being treated like a person. And that shift felt like the first real breath I'd taken in months. Next, I contacted my local precinct in Tampa and added a note to my file. A simple flag: family member prone to filing false emergencies. Proceed with caution. It was surreal. This was the kind of protection people sought from stalkers, exes, or dangerous acquaintances, not older brothers. But I realized something harsh. Abuse doesn't always look like violence. Sometimes it looks like worry. Sometimes it sounds like love. Sometimes it hides behind the word family. And that kind of abuse is the hardest to name. When I got home, I changed my phone number again. This time, permanently. I blocked every contact, every cousin, every aunt, every saved number tied to the house I grew up in. I even blocked unknown callers. I expected relief. But what came first was pain, a sharp, sinking loneliness that wrapped around my ribs. Cutting ties, even toxic ones, creates a silence so deep it vibrates. But beneath the ache, something brighter flickered: peace. The silence that followed was painful, but peaceful. Days passed without a single accusatory voicemail. No frantic calls. No police at my door. No neighbors asking if I was okay. My life became quiet again, quiet in a way it hadn't been since before Gabriel pulled Tampa into his vortex. I'd go to work, come home, cook dinner, watch movies. I started sleeping through the night, breathing easier, feeling lighter. Peace wasn't the absence of family, it was the absence of fear. My family tried to break through the silence. Of course. They called from new numbers, left dramatic messages, some crying, some angry, some guilt-soaked. "Luis, how could you do this to us? We're your family." "Your brother was only trying to help. Come home before something bad happens." Their voices blended into a single chorus of manipulation I no longer responded to. Because for the first time, their chaos no longer dictated my days. But the biggest twist came a week later, when an unknown number called, and I almost ignored it until I saw the area code. It wasn't from El Paso. It was from my dad's workplace, somebody who never called before. Months later, I sit in my Tampa apartment, with the windows cracked open, letting the ocean breeze drift through the rooms like a quiet blessing. The air smells of salt and possibility. The sunlight is softer here, warmer, almost as if Florida itself understands I'm still recovering from the storms I left behind. I sip from a mug of coffee and listen to the distant sound of waves. And for the first time, I don't feel like I'm hiding. But even in this peace, a shadow lingers, the kind that reminds you healing doesn't erase the past. It just teaches you how to outgrow it. I'm still healing, still piecing together the parts of myself I abandoned to please people who only love the version of me they could control. Some mornings I wake up, expecting a knock at the door, expecting another officer, another false report, another crisis manufactured to drag me backward. But the knock never comes. The silence is startling, heavy, liberating. Healing isn't a straight line. It's a winding road paved with old wounds and new beginnings. And sometimes the hardest part is realizing the peace you feared was actually the peace you deserved. I'm still learning that family can love you and still imprison you. The two aren't opposites, they often grow from the same root. My family loved me in the only way they knew: tightly, possessively, suffocatingly. But love without respect is just a locked door painted warm colors. It took me months to understand that leaving didn't make me a bad son, a bad brother. It made me someone finally choosing his own life. And choosing yourself, I've learned, is an act of courage most people never would attempt. Gabriel sends apology letters, now handwritten envelopes stamped from El Paso, filled with tangled justifications and carefully crafted regrets. He writes that he panicked, that he meant well, that everything he did was out of fear for my safety. He apologizes, but every apology circles back to the same narrative. I was the problem. I caused his spiral. His actions were love amplified. Reading them feels like watching someone rewrite history, with a pen dipped in denial. Because apologies don't matter when they're built on the same lies that broke you. But I learned something important, something. It took nearly losing my freedom to understand. If someone must control you to feel close to you, that isn't family, that's captivity. Real family lets you grow. Real love lets you breathe. Real connection respects boundaries instead of bulldozing them. I spent years thinking loyalty meant obedience, that love meant sacrificing my joy to protect their pride. Now, I know better. Freedom isn't granted, it's claimed. And for the first time, I feel free. Free in a way that doesn't feel like running. Free in a way that doesn't feel like waiting for another explosion. Free in a way that allows me to sit on my balcony at sunset, watching the sky turn gold, without fearing who might try to snatch this life away. The phone stays quiet. The walls stay calm. My thoughts are my own. But one quiet evening, as I watched the last light fade, a realization settled over me like a whisper. Freedom wasn't the act of leaving, it was the decision not to go back.